On today's episode, we have a really cool guest here. We have Reid Peterson, and he comes from us with this awesome app called the Grief Refuge app. So we are going to talk about this app and what it can do for you as a griever. Let's get apping.
Let's talk about death, baby. Let's talk about grief and mourning. Is it argumental or existential? What's it mean to me? Let's talk about death.
Hi, I'm Benny Capal, and I'm a funeral professional.
And I'm Nicholas Capal, psychologist.
Hey, Nick, let's talk about death.
Let's do it.
So, Reid, thank you so much for being on today. And honestly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for coming up with this app that helps a lot of struggling people out there that are dealing with grief. So first and foremost, I kind of want you to kind of delve into a little bit about the app, but more importantly, why you did the app, where you came from into this situation.
I appreciate you asking. I'll try to be brief. So in 2006, my dad took his life, and that was a tough one. And it actually took me 10 years before I could say it was suicide. And so, not that I would lived in denial, but it was really strange circumstances of his death. The death certificate said he died by subdural hematoma in his cervical spine, which is your neck. And it's like, well, what did he do? Because he was all alone, no weapons, no suicide note. So for 8 to 10 years, I thought it was an accident. The logistics are he was severely intoxicated. My father was an alcoholic, and he was known to experience flashbacks. He had post-traumatic stress from the Vietnam War. And at the time of his death, what had caused the subdural hematoma in his cervical spine was that he hit the top of his head against a wall in his house, like a really hard wall, and that cracked his spine, and he internally bled out and died. And so dealing with my grief, I went through a lot of a relief at first, because a lot of my young adult life, I was anticipating his death. I had an intuition he was going to take his life. Didn't know how. Thought it was going to be with a handgun, because I knew he owned guns. But then also, after initially feeling the relief and processing it a little bit, I really felt a lot of guilt for feeling the relief, and also a lot of guilt of not being able to talk to my dad about any of my fears and my concerns. So, Doc Nick, I'm sure you're gathering notes here. Definitely think about that. And then after 2 years of my biological father's death, my stepfather, who is just an awesome man, he got the big notification of the C word. He got cancer. And so it was a long journey for him in battling multiple myeloma. And so he fought it for 8 years, and then finally said, I think I'm done, too tired, and just kind of let go and let in. And when he died, it was weird, because I was like, I'm going to be good. I've experienced my dad's death, and so I'll definitely miss Warren. Warren's my stepfather, but I'll be good. But man, was I surprised. I to this day, which is, at the time of our recorded conversation, over 6 years, I still don't know what the heck happened, as far as like how loneliness hit me so hard. It was so strange. Like, I have the most loving and supportive wife. She's amazing. And yet at the same time, like, I would be sitting across from her and we'd be talking about just, our days. And I'd be so checked out. And I just like, I would need to go to moving water. And I happen to live near the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. And so I'd go down to the beach and I'd just stare at the waves. I'd do it for hours. And then I'd just come back, and my wife would be like, you feel better? And I'd be like, yeah, I think so. And she'd be like, okay, great. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. And I said, thanks. I appreciate it. I feel really selfish. So that's a little bit about my backstory. But What's interesting is after Warren died, a couple years went by, and I just, I've worked in technology for quite a while, and I was like, you know, I just feel something inside of me growing and growing and growing that like I need to do something more healing. Um, healing's a very broad term, but I didn't even really know how to define it at the time. I just said to myself, I feel like I'm a healer and I need to show up for people in whatever way I can. And that led to some online research because I was interested in learning more about supporting grieving people. And I knew I didn't want to do it from a traditional counseling role. All credit to counselors who are listening. I think you do fantastic work. I've worked with bereavement counselors, so I got a lot of respect for you. But at the same time, I just knew it wasn't me. And so I was like, And through online searching, I came across this amazing program. This guy, Dr. Alan Wolfelt. And I was like, look at what he's offering. It's just kind of like it's a certification, pretty generalized, but man, he talks about some great stuff. And man, he's got some great education. And so I was like, hey, I'm going to look into this. I went to my first training, which these are set up in seminar formats. You kind of like go to either Fort Collins, Colorado, or you go to Scottsdale, Arizona, and you sit in class all week. And I went to my first training and I was like, this is amazing. Like, I was blown away. I felt like my heart was ripped wide open. And I was just like, this is where life feels authentic for me. And so I was like, okay, I'm pursuing this. And then to get to the point, thanks for your patience. After my third training, I've been to 5, and that's what you need for your certification. After my third training, it was pretty interesting. It was about the focus was on effective grief education, and in the trainings we each had to do a presentation, and I did mine on managing guilt-related grief. And after I did my presentation, I got approached by 3 different people, and they all said, hey, what you presented was amazing, but I want to tell you, the sound of your voice is even more soothing than anything. And I was like, I've gotten a lot of compliments on the sound of my voice. And one lady said, have you thought about doing like grief meditations? And I was like, no. And she said, you should do grief meditations on the Calm app. And I was like, do they? And I'm familiar with the Calm app. It's a very popular meditation app. And I said, do they have a grief category? And she said, let's look. And so we explored it, and they did it. And I ended up looking up their head of content, Tamara Levitt, who's Canadian, by the way, and reached out to her and just totally cold contacted her through LinkedIn. And, she responded, to my surprise, and entertained my idea for a while, but I just didn't really fit in with their business model. Their business model is really about dealing with celebrities and people who sold millions of copies of books. And so I was like, I got my ghosted rejection. And so I was like, all right, I guess that wasn't meant to be. But then a dear friend of my wife's, actually her best friend, they've been friends for 40 years. She's a really successful life coach. And she said, you know what, Reid, I think you can do better. And I kind of laughed at her and shrugged her off. And I was like, do better than Calm? You know how many millions of subscribers they have? And she's like, that's not what I'm talking about. She's like, I'm talking about creating what you can bring to the world. And I was like, And she's like, and I think you can do it via an app. And I was like, an app? She's like, Reid, you know technology. And I'm like, but I don't know how to program apps. She's like, you can find the help. And so I was like, all right, I'll accept your challenge. And I started looking into it. And the more I looked into it, the more I felt energized by it. And I was like, okay, this is definitely a passion of mine. And so it led to, the traditional business aspects of market research and things like that. And eventually got an app published on the App Store and what is Google's one? The Google Play Store.
So let me pause you for a second. Let me ask you this. What makes your app important for people to come to? Like, what do you really think, being the mastermind behind it, like, what do you want people to know about your app? What does your app do?
Well, There's two answers, Dr. Nick. The first answer is I want people to know, like, it's hard for me to say it's better because I don't know any other technology that, I haven't lived it. I haven't fully experienced it. And I think I'm a fair guy, so I don't say it's better. Just word unique comes to mind. What makes it unique is more logistically, there's a daily message shared every single day, 365 days a year, and 366 on the leap years. And so most applications and most technology isn't that consistent nor that available to have messages and musings in form of support. So that's answer number one. But then kind of getting to my heart of the hearts, like I knew that the way I wanted to create Grief Refuge had to do with an authentic grief experience. So, a lot of people, in my experience of supporting others who are grieving, a lot of people, they're looking for a result, right? They no longer want to feel the intensity of the hurt and the painful emotions that they feel. And so a lot of them look for an app. But most people, I don't know the stats, but it seems like most people that grieve, they can't just live in this perspective of, steps, progress over and over. They need validation. They need to know that the shit that they're going through is real and it's quote unquote normal. Not everybody goes through it the same exact way, but everybody can say, hey, I've had my own version of that. And so I know that Grief Refuge speaks to some of these hardships and some of these difficult experiences just as much as it's like, focus on positivity or gratitude. So it's a really well balanced and holistic app.
First things first, I think it's amazing that you're normalizing grief. And I also think it's special because it's allowing people to grieve in their own way, which is such an important thing. And especially with your background and what you've experienced, whether you have been trained as a counselor, psychologist, whatever, you have experience to talk about, which I think is important because if we were all able to share our experiences about grief, with which we don't do well, let's be real, our society does not do well. If we were able to sit in a room and talk about how this, this death that happened 15, 25, 2 days ago is still ruining my life, I think we would be in a better place. So again, I go back to this idea of community because your app hopefully is bringing people together, right? It's hopefully normalizing, but also allowing an openness for people to share their own experience. And I think that's so important. And every day, all day, my dad said it best: the more you love someone, the more it's going to hurt. So if you truly love someone, it's going to hurt. And it's going to hurt every day, all day. You're going to have random times in your life where you see a movie and maybe a quote comes up and you're like, oh, there's dad. And you're like, I was doing so well. What happened? So thank you. And I completely agree with you. I think this is so important. We need to normalize this experience.
And Reid, I want to be honest with you too. I had an opportunity to look into it, and I think it's wonderful. I like how there's so many things you could do in it too. It's not just the intentions, right? You have a journal, you have a podcast, you have stories of people actually telling their stories. This is beautiful because just be honest, it's convenient, right? So especially for somebody who isn't comfortable yet, possibly going to talk to somebody, or maybe went to somebody and didn't get the response they needed. This is an opportunity for them to at least get started on the journey and then still be able to do it daily. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And I think you nailed it earlier. You're not saying that I'm the one, fit all Band-Aid by any means, form, or shape, but the idea is you can add this to going to see a group or going to see your psychologist or whatnot. And especially maybe just you didn't even know you were dealing with it. Like you said, you were kind of in denial, almost, not necessarily that you didn't think your dad was dead, but just the kind of this idea that it's kind of in a surreal pattern, right, for a while, until you really realize, wow, I really wasn't in that right mind frame, right? In that I was going through that grief journey. So I think it's incredible. And I personally do not come from a situation that was extremely close to me for suicide, but I can tell you that my wife lost her father to suicide when we first started dating back in 2005. So to be honest with you, I have seen how it's affected their family. And I'm actually part of an organization that helps suicidality as well. So like I said, I don't know what you're going through, but I think it's very awesome that you were vulnerable enough to tell that story. And I think it really just puts an extra stamp on this app, because you're coming from a place where you know of some of this that's going on. So yet again, thank you for coming up with this. I think it's wonderful. What is your favorite part of the Refuge app, you personally?
I think it's the feature called the Daily Refuge. It's the daily messages. I get the best feedback on it, and I even listen to it. It's weird because it's my own voice. I narrate these, and I turn these on. I'm like, oh yeah, there's my voice again, blah blah blah. But I let go of that judgment and actually hone in on the actual message. The point of each experience, and then I noticed how I feel centered. Like by the time I'm done listening to it, I'm like, I just feel more human. And so I like that feature the best.
Has ever your own app hit you where you were dealing with your own grief? Because as you said earlier, grief comes in waves. So has doing this, has it been a cathartic like situation for you, or has there been times where you're like, this is just too much, I gotta stop for a second and come back to it?
Both, Benny. Yeah, there's it's sometimes I get into a flow state because I have to create so much content for the app, and I just feel like so purpose driven, and I'm just like, I love this. This gives my life so much meaning. And I'm even researching. I'm looking up other people that support others in grief, and vibing with kind of their flow. And also so I'm honestly, I'm trying to own my projection as much as possible. I think Dr. Nick, I think he'd appreciate this. It's impossible to not project all the time, but at the same time, I try to stay general enough so that people can take the messaging and I like using the metaphor of like, okay, here's this box of tools that are provided, and so if it's the app, it's the features in the app. So now the person who's using the app can take from the toolbox and use it in their life, so they customize it to their experience. Because what I've seen when I've looked at a lot of grief, quote unquote, grief experts, is I see they have a system. So they have a toolbox, but they want you, the griever, to fit into their toolbox. And I just think that doesn't serve the grieving person. It doesn't really help them feel the authentic experience that they need to feel in order to get their aspect of healing. And then the second part, Benny, there has been times where I'm like, I need a break. Like I can't, I won't even turn on like streaming services because ironically, there's so much like death and grief and some of these programs that are made these days. I'll just like go chill in nature, and I'll just like hang out. And I'm a big beach volleyball player, so I'll go play beach volleyball at the courts and get a sweat on and get some physical activity, but also laugh with the people that I play with, because we make jokes and cap on each other and whatever.
So first things first, for the listeners out there, you remind me of John Krasinski from The Office. I don't know if you've ever been told that, but that's what I've been thinking about this whole time. I apologize. I had to say it. The second thing I was thinking of is self-care. Anybody in this work grief work. It's very, very, very dark. And if you don't take care of yourself, you're going to get back into your own grief. That's the reality, right? So good for you to be doing activities and getting back into nature and calming yourself. That's so important. But I think the thing is that I keep thinking about is, you know, why is it so hard, in your opinion? Because Benny and I have already talked about our opinion. Why do you think it's so hard for most people to talk about this stuff, in your opinion?
Well, do you want to talk about closed family systems, Dr. Nick?
Sure. Go for it. Go for it.
So I don't have the licensure in psychology, but I did
You
pursue
absolutely know a lot about psychology, though. I'm going to give you that. So, but I'm just curious. What do you think?
Well, okay, so I guess my opinion, the first thing that comes to mind is it just never felt welcomed, and it never felt invited as far as people growing up, and they experienced I was trying to avoid the taboo terms, but they experienced deaths that perhaps were anticipated. Like a grandparent dying. They lived a nice full life and they died of natural causes in old age.
The Hollywood death, right? In their bed, was just perfectly, they came and seen them. They looked peaceful when they died. What most people don't understand is that's not the normal. That's not the normal.
Right. Yes, the Hollywood death. The sun,
the window opens and the bird flies in, tweets a little song, and then flows out. There's
a perfect death letter on the table. I thought it was coming. That never happens.
The sun comes out from behind the clouds. I mean, it's perfectly well scripted. It's perfect.
Yes. So yeah, oftentimes death is pretty messy. Death is pretty ugly. Death is pretty painful. I've heard a lot of people share experiences throughout their grief journeys of their significant others specifically, being on such strong medication that they were, arguably near psychotic, and they were threatening, their spouse of 35 years. I'm going to kill you. And it's like, well, who is this person? These can be really hard things. So, Dr. Nick, getting back to your question, it's just, I feel like I believe that we kind of grow up learning to relate to others. And, we obviously grow up in our families. And so if death isn't really a part of the conversation, it kind of never really grows to be one. I'm grateful. The first death I experienced was a friend in 5th grade. He died from spinal meningitis. And my mom really held the space for me in regards to that. I give her a lot of credit to this day, because had she lived accordingly, like some of the teachers at my school who just kind of moved on and ignored it, it might have been really hard. I think I was able to process that pretty smoothly. So kudos to Mom, if you're listening. And
thank
but
you,
it's
Mom.
so weird. It's so weird. It's like this empty chair next to me for a while, and it's like, why isn't the teacher saying anything about this? It's just
I want to say something you brought up, that death is messy. But what's interesting is birth is messy, but nobody talks about that side of birth. They talk about this beautiful baby, right? Why can't we flip the scope on death as something beautiful and not something that's horrible? And, I always kind of the whole yin and yang, right? Birth leads to death. I mean, that's just the idea, but that's the problem, right? Death is always a negative connotation, when really, if you really look at the reason for death, it's beautiful, because it is partially why we live the lives we live. And if you did live forever, it would be extremely monotonous and boring. but we don't look at it that way. And you're right. It's how we have talked as generations on how to approach death. So absolutely.
Well, it's fascinating because you brought that up, and I the whole time you were talking about that, I was thinking about The Sopranos, right? If anybody was a Sopranos lover, one of the things that a lot of the viewers hated about Sopranos was it didn't end.
Anticlimactic.
We all
for sure.
want an end. Why can't an end be good?
There you go. Happy ending, right? But before
Why
we,
does it have to be happy?
why can't it be lovely?
Why can't it just be an ending?
It just be an ending.
Like you said, death is not this Christmas fairy tale, Hollywood version. Death is death.
That's right.
Just like you said, birth is birth.
Birth is
If
messy.
you watch birth, it
Birth
can
is
be
messy.
really ugly, right?
Uh,
It can. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of. I watched my wife both times, and it's an experience if you haven't experienced it. But with that being said, it's such a beautiful experience too, because what it brings is so touching and beautiful. But I think what we're missing is after death, we truly learn something about ourselves.
well, isn't that the true gift? Is grief? Isn't
Yeah.
honestly the true gift of death is grief?
But it's also terrifying.
Oh,
It's also all the negative things. But like the thing is that if you can sit with it and you can just explore yourself through it without judgment, because that's the big thing, right? We always feel guilty. I should have spent more time, or I should have been over there all the time.
I'm sorry for crying.
Yeah, I'm sorry for crying, talking about how much I love this person. I miss them. I'm sorry. I'm going to say this to all the listeners out there. If you're crying because you love someone,
You have nothing
that's
to be sorry
love.
for. You have
that
nothing to be
is
sorry for.
love. That is what it is. Like, don't judge yourself for crying about missing someone. That without that, we wouldn't know how much we care about people. Again, the yin and the yang, right? We have to understand that as humans, we are going to feel. We're going to feel happiness, and we're also going to feel sadness. There's not a bad or a good. We've gotten into this dichotomous thinking that if we're not happy, something must be wrong. And the reality is nothing's wrong. You're grieving, and it's okay. And everybody goes through this. Even the guys that are like, come on, I never cry. They're in the bathroom crying. You're just not seeing it. That's the difference. So stop and just stop judging each other and let people grieve. That would be beautiful.
All right, Reid, before we close, how do people get this app? Is it everywhere? Is it easy to navigate, to find? How do they get this on their smartphones?
There's a secret passage code that you got to send.
Right, it's super cool, right?
Please send it to me. We won't tell anybody else.
Yeah, it's like, a secret door knock, you got to send the right text vibrations. No, it's actually really easy to find. It's a free download from the Google Play Store and also Apple's App Store. And, it's amazing because I'm surprised. I think it's been downloaded in over 100 countries now. And I'm like, how is this possible? Because the app is all English based. And I'm like, do that many people know English? I'm like, I guess they do. But I'm just, yes, I'm proud. But at the same time, I'm definitely humbled and really motivated to just keep doing the best that I can to help people feel that much more supported.
Well, thank you, Reid. I think we've come a long way, and apps like this is helping climb that mountain of grief that we're all trying to help as much as we can. So thank you for being on. Like Reid said, go out there on your app, go on your phone, pull up the app stores or whatever, and download it. It'll help. It'll help, or maybe it'll help somebody that get through some of the grief that they're dealing with. Yet again, review us, like us, listen to us. Have any questions, thoughts, please let us know. Contact us on let's talk about deathpod@gmail.com. And yet again, from the bottom of my heart, Reid, thank you for being on today. And thank you for the Grief Refuge app.
You're welcome. Yeah. Thanks for the work you guys are doing. I can tell you guys care. You give a damn.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. And also, one last thing for you, Reid. Take time to take care of yourself. That's so important. So important. I know life gets ahead of us, but like, take care of yourself.
Because, Reid, if you're not talking about death,
You're not living. Have a great night.